So I'll call the meeting to order and recognize that we do meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE Nation. Tonight's council meeting is an extraordinary special council meeting, open council, to have a conversation that's strategic in nature. It's part of what we're trying to do to facilitate our own dialogue and to engage the community in a different way. So I want to contextualize that, and then we are also going to deal with the final reading of the finance bylaw as well. So moving on then to the agenda and a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Goulet, Councillor Runge, second. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried and we don't have any minutes. So the discussion tonight is around the Johnston Bridge and the future options for repair and remediation of the Johnston Bridge. It has taken us some time, as council will be aware, to get some of the engineering work done just to give us some options. We had to wait for the piers to be analyzed as well. So that documentation was made available to staff about a month ago. I cannot see City of Quesnel, so I can't see the city manager or Ria. There we go. Okay, and there's Mr. Coben. The timeliness of this is we're getting it in front of council as soon as we had the documentation we needed from the engineers, and Chris, Director Coben, was able to look at that, make sense out of it for us, and get a report in front of us. So there hasn't been a very long delay from actually getting the findings report from the engineers. With it being a strategic conversation, I just want to remind council about a couple of things. One, this is not one where we're making a decision. The intention tonight is to give direction to staff to move us forward to the kind of documentation, the kind of information we need to be able to make a decision about the Johnston Bridge. But the decision that we make needs to be within the context of a number of other strategic initiatives. So as you see, one of the options for us is somewhere north of 2.5 million for this. We don't currently have it in our capital plan. It's on an order of magnitude, for example, of doing the fire hall with our own funding, if we wanted to do that, if the grant didn't come through. So that strategic implications for our capital plan, what does it do long-term there, and what are our options of financing whatever option we come up with. The other piece is, of course, our waterfront strategy. And the rate loading the bridge may put some appetite out there to get trucks back on the bridge, which then means that we would have trucks, particularly logging trucks, going by our new RV campground, hopefully the new LHTAKO Cultural Center, etc. And so council needs to think about that and what has the weight restrictions on the Johnston Bridge done to reroute traffic of that nature out of that corridor, which we have a strategic intention to develop as a pretty significant tourism precinct for us. And then the other piece I would suggest we keep in the back of our mind is what does what we do with the Johnston Bridge do to our positioning around the interconnector? And, you know, going to load rating on the Johnston Bridge, what does that do for our arguments about the province expediting their decision on the interconnector and getting a proper set of bridges over the Quesnel and the railway track that would have the 4 lanes, that wouldn't have overhead, and to get a lot of that traffic out of our downtown core, because if we're objective is to get traffic out of the downtown core, and then we go to again, moving trucks through the Johnston Bridge, that's again strategically potentially at odds with some of the other traffic diversions and rerouting that we're trying to accomplish with the interconnector. So keep in mind all of our other pieces that are going on so that we can have a meaningful strategic conversation, because that's the nature of the kind of conversations we wanted to be able to have before we get into decision making. So with that, I think City Manager, were you going to do a bit of a context before turning it to Director Coben, or is Director Coben going to lead off first?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to provide a bit of context there. And thank you for that discussion, Mr. Mayor, also about the political considerations around this issue. And they are numerous. There's a lot of political considerations. This report is focused on the physical infrastructure pieces and how do we get that infrastructure back up and running, and some of the background information to it. For example, the policy paper deals with it more from a physical infrastructure than from a political basis. So thank you for that input. I think it's an important part of this discussion piece. Director Coben in his report talks a bit about the background of this report, but just to bear with me for 1 minute, I would like to give you some of the deep background on this report, or not on this report, on the Johnston Bridge. So we were approached by our industrial ratepayers in 2017 and 2018, and their goal was to try to get 9-axle trucks approved for usage throughout the city. So these are 1 extra axle on the logging truck and higher weight limits to go up from the 65,300 kilogram weight up to, I believe it's 71 or 72,000 kilograms. So part of that process is that they first was a study based on the construction of all of our bridges. So Moffat Bridge, the Baker Creek Bridge and Johnston Bridge. They looked at the construction methodologies and said, yes, they're all appropriate for heavier weights. And then as a second step, we requested that they take a look and do some detailed inspections of the bridges themselves. As a result of that detailed inspection, which is probably the most detailed inspection we've had done on that Johnston Bridge, a number of flaws were found with that bridge. So mostly related to deterioration due to winter use and the salt and the grime accumulation on the bridge, which despite our best efforts to clean it, and they are significant efforts, are problematic when it's a winter use bridge and the logging trucks traffic on those bridges. So that created the issue that we had, which resulted in October 3rd of 2018 that the city of Quesnel shut that bridge down for all use while we studied the problem. Subsequent to that, we opened that bridge up again to load limits of 10,000 kilograms or less allowable to traffic in both ways. Also subsequent to that, the fire department approached us and said, hey, that's an important linkage for us to get over that bridge so that in case of a fire, we can provide assistance without undue delays of driving around the long ways. So we had the bridge engineer look at that as well and give us approval to allow our fire apparatus over the bridge with the exception of the ladder truck, but the rest of the engines are allowed over that bridge as long as they stop the traffic, go lights and sirens, 1 vehicle alone on the bridge at a time and drive down the upstream lane of that bridge, which is the least deteriorated side. So that is what the status of where we're at right now as far as what the legal limits are. That 10,000 kilograms still stands. Our fire apparatus is still able to go over that bridge, and it's been standing there at this point in time for a couple of years now. In the meantime, as the mayor has alluded to, we did look at the piers. We did a bathymetric survey of the water there, the Quesnel River, to take a look at what's underneath the water and what's changed with those conditions. The Director Coben has developed a peer protection program where he got funding from council for this year in our budget to proceed with. And in addition to that, Director Coben, along with the bridge engineer, McCall Engineering, has developed an enhanced inspection protocol and cleaning program for our bridges. So that has also been underway. So we haven't been sitting on our thumbs. We've been very busy trying to improve our practices with those. So that puts us to where we're at today. And today we have significant amount of options in front of us prepared by McCall Engineering. And those options look at a number of different factors. They look at right from a Band-Aid solution with no guarantees on extended life and nothing more than just strictly Band-Aid to a full replacement bridge. We also looked at a number of different decking options. There was some discussion at the first part of this of whether we could go with a solid deck instead of the steel mesh deck, whether we could extend the deck to put a pedestrian or alternate transportation lane on it, a number of different options. So the net result of that is, I believe we're up over 10 options at this point in time for how we can, or what the vision is for that bridge fix up is. What we are trying to do now is 10 options is completely unworkable. We want this project to keep moving ahead. We think it's very important that this project moves ahead, but we would like to be able to narrow it down to the top option and just work on that option. Anytime you get the bridge engineering folks involved, it is very expensive. Those type of engineering companies, they're critical to the process, and it's important that they're involved enough that we know that we're getting the proper due diligence to the process that only they can provide. So they're really critical, but they're very expensive. We cannot afford to keep looking at 10 different options. We want to narrow it down to one option. And that's what this report that Director Coben has prepared talks about, is trying to narrow it down to that one option. So as we move forward, hopefully we can get there. As the mayor referred to, the recommendation on this report, that there are other competing priorities, and I think we perhaps were a little bit optimistic on putting this recommendation that we go ahead and approve this funding. I think where we need to get to is start to move down the road towards getting to a recommendation of fixing this. If we can get the option selected and get some funding approved to further drive this option and to do some of the detailed engineering to help us to refine costs and to really understand the issues there, I think would be a good first step. So that's my goal out of this meeting, would be to get to that point. And unless there's questions on that, kind of that bigger picture, I will hand it over to Director Coben to talk more about this.
Okay, yes, so the McCall inspection in September 2020, that was a more thorough evaluation, and that followed the previous 2018 inspection report. It was also after the bathymetry survey was done, which surveyed the river bottom and assessed the pier condition. At that time, there was a recommendation that we do not at all go over the maximum of 63.5, no matter what the option of repair is. The 2020 inspection repair options that were updated include option A, which is a comprehensive bridge repair for a 15 to 20 year remaining service life. Brings the bridge up back to a full legal axle load rating, 63,500 kilograms. The estimate for this option is the $2 to $2.5 million range. Includes new bearings and plates, replacement of bracing, repair of girders, and a coating of the girder to further protect them to extend the lifespan due to salt and rust and deterioration. Option B was a low risk minimal repair for a 10-year remaining life. This still limits the a 10-ton weight limit maximum on the bridge, but the cost is up there. It's $1 to $1.5 million. An option of a high risk minimal repair was a very minimal repairs, which doesn't involve any of the bearings or changes to that. It's simply a Band-Aid on what's there now, and we would still require, two times a year inspections to keep that bridge open, so long as it passed, or just leave it as is and continue with semi-annual inspections to assess the bridge condition. With the biggest unknown implications of the first two options, A and B, it's the level of effort required to temporarily relocate the facilities to facilitate these repairs. So basically, you'd have to lift the bridge up in order to replace the bearings, which basically transfer the load to the bridge piers. The planning and engineering, it would take, what would be a 2-year process to basically detail the cost estimate, get a handle on exactly what needs to be done leading up into a construction phase. So yeah, and like I said, options C and D do not address the issues around the bridge bearings not functioning. So, should the comprehensive repair option be undertaken, council has a discretion to restrict their weight limit on the bridge to 10 tons, should they so choose. And consideration could be given to certain vehicles over the 10-ton restriction, such as school buses, emergency vehicles, snow removal equipment, etc. Delaying bridge repairs, it does increase the risk of further restrictions to bridge travel and usability, including potential for full closure. The girders are the main support beams for the bridge and critical for load transfer to the bearings. As they continue to deteriorate, the capacity to carry load diminishes. The bearings carry and transfer the movement to the piers and abutments, and they're no longer functioning or transferring the movement as they're designed to do, although no damage to the piers due to this has been observed. So as I said, 10 options were identified, and these are the options that were further evaluated and continued in cost provided for this report.
Okay, we're going to assume that council, we got the reports out as early as we could last week. So council's had an opportunity to look not only at Chris's report, but the McCall report. So the floor is open. Questions, comments, thoughts about this little conundrum we've got called Johnston Bridge.
If I could jump in one more time, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, but just one more little bit of background, which Chris referred to but did not directly address, which was, why do we think option 1A is the best? What are the parameters that we as staff selected 1A, or what number 1, I guess it is now. So the reason we like that option the best is because we wanted a solution that when we spend some money, we know we'll get some extended time. So that option, their engineers are saying that option is a 15 to 20-year option, which is that's a significant amount of time in the opinion of staff. Any option which is less than 10 years is 10 years or less is a bit of just a make work project, because you'll be at it again within a couple of cycles. The other parameters we liked is we wanted an option which would bring back the full legal loading of 63.5. As Director Coben referred to, we didn't, or the piers themselves could not handle more than a 63.5 loading as per the recommendation of McCall Engineering. So we didn't want to exceed that because we didn't want to do extensive pier work in trying to improve that load. Those piers are very, very old. They're significantly older than the bridge itself. They're from a previous bridge. And that's common. Piers often get reused if they're in good shape. So we didn't want to increase the loading. We didn't want any phased approaches. That first report from McCall Engineering, where there was, I believe, 10 different options, the lowest cost option in there was a phased option. But what the phasing doesn't consider is the personal disruption to people of closing the bridge numerous times to do the different phases. We think it's worth the dollars to spend them upfront and do the work upfront without having a phased approach. And then finally, we didn't want options would increase the overall weighting of the bridge, which is why we didn't select options where the bridge deck changed substantially. The steel mesh deck is a lowest weight option. It's not the best option for some forms of transportation, like motorbikes and cyclists tend to have more issues with that steel deck, particularly when it's wet, but it is low weight. So we wanted to maintain that lower weight because any weight you add to the superstructure decreases the road or the loading capacity of that bridge. So those were the factors that were considered for option the option we selected. And then the final factor, which is kind of overriding, is that option lowers the risks. If you take an option that says there's no guarantees to these Band-Aid solutions, our risk factors are not lowered. You know, the risk of a sudden of events on that bridge, what you know, maybe due to deterioration happen quicker than we would expect. So we wanted to have an option that lowered that risk by bringing it back up to the rating, fixing all the problems and moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, Council. Councilor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the report. I got a couple of questions. Would this, I understand that a solid deck is more expensive and heavier, but would a solid deck slow the deterioration? Because obviously a solid deck would protect the underpinnings of the bridge from salt and water and corrosion.
Yes, so what our engineers are telling us is that even with your solid concrete deck, you still have all your maintenance over and above what the steel deck was. So that the conversations around why the steel deck was chosen to begin with was due to the fact that it's the lightest and most cost-effective option for what those piers were designed to handle. So like city manager said, any increased or adding of dead load weight, it not only reduces the bridge carrying capacity, but there is also the ongoing maintenance. And there still are the girders, although they would be somewhat protected. There's still scuppers and drainage to maintain that would be on that bridge, similar to what we maintain on the Moffat.
Okay, second question. Have we heard anything from Ministry of Transportation and Highways regarding the potential capacity change of Maple Drive? And I'm thinking of the fact that there's an active landslip in the area of Ellison Road. And I guess, you know, what will happen if Maple Drive becomes inoperable from the standpoint of heavy loads?
So just so that we stay on track, why is that pertinent to our discussion about the nature of the repairs to Johnston Bridge?
It's pertinent because if Maple Drive becomes, if the capacity of Maple Drive is reduced, then obviously we're going to have to look at increasing the capacity of the Johnston Bridge in order to be able to provide access to the plywood plant for loaded trucks coming and going.
But again, so from a political perspective, I think we need to be quite careful that our position is that the ministry needs to deal with Maple Drive, or they can own Johnston Bridge. Right? So I think Johnston Bridge is a topic in itself. And I take your point. I'm not being dismissive, Councillor Paul. I think we just need to be quite careful how we position this. The city manager can speak to a meeting that we did have with Modi around Maple Drive. But even if Maple Drive wasn't, you know, having some issues, we still have the Johnston Bridge issue to address. And so we need to just make sure we contextualize it properly. So city manager, maybe you could speak to the conversation you've had with Modi about the situation with Maple Drive.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So we did have that conversation with our local representative from Modi about, given that there's some slippage evident on Maple Drive, what happens if that road closes down? Where does the industrial traffic go? And there is a back route up through, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. The intent would be to maintain Maple Drive as open as long as possible for industrial traffic. If that means if the road started to go away and they couldn't shore it up and they had to narrow the road down to one lane, alternating traffic there to allow industrial through, they would. That's their number one goal there, is to maintain that road. And it's, in addition to that, if emergency work could be done to shore that section up, they would do that as well. those things are not always possible. If there was a total shutdown of that section of Maple Drive, it's likely that the loaded logging trucks would be asked to use that back road up and out of the plywood plant. Now, that is a very difficult road, and there's a number of difficulties. And in addition, my understanding is that it's there's some First Nations concerns there as well. So I'm not saying that's a slam dunk decision, but that is would be their option put in front of them. And that is the, I believe, what the ministry has had the discussion with the plywood plant folks.
And so I do want to reiterate for council that there is, you know, a situation with Maple Drive, but if something happened to Maple Drive, it's more than just normative traffic we would have on Johnston Bridge, because all of the southern commercial and industrial traffic that uses Maple Drive never comes anywhere near Johnston Bridge, doesn't come anywhere near town, right? It just comes off Highway 97 from the south and goes down to the plywood plant and goes back up Maple Drive and goes south on the highway. So it's a very different conversation if the province was going to rely on Johnston sub, on, you know, our road system in order to facilitate full access egress of all traffic to the plywood plant. And that's why I think we need to be careful not to be distracted by it. We need to be conscious that there's a play going on there, but we still have a decision to make about Johnston Bridge in a normative traffic situation as well, right? So hopefully the Maple Drive situation, the province comes up with a resolution that maintains that as a commercial industrial capable road.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could add one other thought to that conversation, was that I think the underlying feeling is, what about Johnston Avenue? Would we allow trucks on that? That question's come before council. That road is not built to industrial standards. The Ministry of Transportation knows that road is not built to industrial standards. So that is not an option in front of anyone at this point in time. So it's just not a good option, because that road would really take a beating if the loaded trucks went over that road.
So let's come back to Johnston Bridge and, you know, the reports that we've got and the options we've got. Councillor Runge.
Thank you. And I think I'm just going to speak just a little bit to just the report right now. I actually like option number one. I think that's for me, I was looking at all the options. I think it's, given the option 1B, I think it's the most effective option. I absolutely agree with everybody, with what was said with regards to taking the bridge down, you know, 5 years from now to do another repair. I actually like the idea of taking option one, getting going before we get the park going, so that we actually have a place to put stuff if we had to move it already. So, you know, that's where I stand right now after reading the report.
Other comments, questions from council? Councillor Rudenberg and then Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. So I also believe that the report, I appreciate the report, and I appreciate trying to figure out some of the inspection report comments too. And what I get to is the fact that it's not, the bridge is in trouble, and we all know that. I also appreciate option one, just for the fact, I don't believe that phasing is an option for any kind of project of this size, because the consistent disruption of people flow, traffic, etc., is not worth that. Costs always go up when you phase something. It's never a one-time cost. Your costs seem to exponentially go up the longer you have to phase it. So, so the question I have is around, you know, so option one gives us the full legal axle load rating back again, correct?
That's right.
If we could be, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. If we could be clear to use what they've got. So in the report, it's option A, B, C, and D.
Sorry.
So for clarity for the public and for reference for minutes. So we're talking about option A is both Councillor Runge and Councillor Rudenberg are referring to.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, option A. So what kind of pressure do you think would be put back on us as council to allow full loads on the truck, given that the bridge would now be capable of taking full loads? And how do we say, how do we work that around, saying, no, it's not to our best interest to allow full loads on there again, even though it can be rated for full loads?
Thank you. I don't know if that's a rhetorical question or not. At the end of the day, it is council's ability to set those load limits. So is there going to be pressure? Absolutely. Have we seen that pressure already? Yes, we have. Now, council does have that right. Council, of course, shuts down, plays with load limits every single year when we are dealing with road restrictions. So it's something we do on a regular basis. Council has the option of fixing that road up to the load limit and then maintaining a 10,000 kilogram load limit on it with the excess capacity just for emergency purposes. Potentially, there's been a little bit of discussion about whether that could be seasonally adjusted so that in the summer season when the RV park is functional, that you didn't have industrial traffic through it. And in the winter time, when the RV park is down for the season, whether you could allow it. But again, there's a million different options there, depending on when the interconnector goes through and how council wants to see traffic flowing through the downtown. But make no mistake, council has the right to set load limits on its bridges and its infrastructure.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And it was somewhat of a rhetorical question. It was kind of like, because we know that's exactly what's going to happen. Whether it comes from industry, I'm not sure, because we've not heard a lot from industry lately, if I'm correct. So it would be more, I'm not sure, other community members wondering why the restrictions are still there. And I get that council has that ability to put whatever restrictions on their infrastructure that they want. So I think maybe what I'm getting to is people will say, so why then are you going with that more expensive fix if you aren't going to allow full load capacity? I think that's probably the question that people will eventually get to.
Okay, I see Councillor Runge wanting to jump in for a second time. I've got Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my first question here is kind of based on 1A, and I need to understand the estimated service life of this option is 15 years, meaning it has to be replaced afterwards. So for clarity, what does that mean? Like piers, the whole thing, or Chris?
Yes, well, the 15 to 20 year lifespan. So, even with repairs to the bridges, we are going and planning to maintain a comprehensive bridge inspection program. So there is some conservativeness I've found with the bridge engineers and their reporting. And I guess there's no real easy answer to that. The answer is we continue to maintain it. We inspect it as we notice deteriorations. We can make plans for repairs. So the 15 years isn't a be all end all number. It's basically a number. These are commonly it will last. So whether that is additional girder work or whether that's more bearing replacement or essentially complete bridge replacement, including piers, that's yet to be determined. The bathymetry surveys, that we're going to continue with them every 3 to 5 years. Those piers are very old, but they're in very good condition for their age. So just like any inspections of street inspections, sidewalk inspections, we're being told we can get 15 to 20 years out of it, but additional inspections and extent of repairs will be determined, 10, 15 years down the road.
Okay, that's helpful. And that's kind of where I thought you were going to go with that. So if hypothetically we looked at 1A with the possibility of ramping it up to be able to do 67,000, but we didn't enable that. To me, logically, that would mean that the lifespan of the bridge is going to be extended even further because we've ramped it up to the next level But in cases of emergency or school buses or whatever council decides on, you know, instead of cheaping out, we've gone to the extra level, and potentially that could increase that 15 to 20 even longer if we have repairs and we're on top of it the whole way, correct?
Yes, with the inspection, with the majority of the corrosion issues we're finding is at either end of the bridge where the abutments were, so where the heavy traffic hits the bridge and, you know, debris and salt, etc., it falls off. That's where we're seeing that corrosion. And even with extensive cleaning, you know, we take a week in the spring to clean it, we're still not keeping up. So yes, it would extend the life of the bridge with less weight and less debris and less traffic.
Okay, that's perfect. I'm glad you said that. And I'm sure we could even look at extending the timing of, you know, you said 1 week in the spring. I'm sure if we've identified that those are one of the major issues, then, you know, if it takes 2 weeks to extend the life of that bridge even further, then that's positive. I think maybe I'll fire this one right to the mayor. And, you know, I've been thinking about the implications as well of where we go with this bridge as compared to the interconnector. Have we received any knowledge, any information back from them directly on if you do this, then that's what's going to happen with the interconnector?
No, not at all. The interconnector from the Ministry of Transportation perspective is a separate issue for them, and is also ironically most likely going to be driven by the sorry state of the Quesnel River Bridge and the railway bridge. I have had a preliminary conversation with the minister. We're in the process of booking a formal meeting with the minister to make sure he's fully briefed, and we continue to advance that project. I think for us, it's the question of traffic flow post interconnector, right? So we've argued that you know, the interconnector project needs to be done as a whole project to make sure those bridges are aligned to move that traffic along the railway and up into 2 Mile Flat. So if we get ourselves in the situation where we create the Johnston Bridge back as an industrial route again, then you're going to see logging truck traffic coming off of the interconnector going down between Labordi and the rail station, and, you know, crossing all the way through to go up to the plywood plant, as opposed to going up Dragon Hill where they're going now, down Maple Drive to the plywood plant. And then the same with the potential for them, you know, coming over from Anderson and rerouting through, as opposed to just a straight shot to the interconnector and up Dragon. As we've indicated, you know, initially there was a lot of sort of demand or push to get the logging trucks back over the Johnston Bridge and up the plywood plant. We haven't heard boo, and we've been in multiple conversations with West Fraser and others. We haven't heard anything for a long time about that. So our discussion around Johnston goes to Councillor Rudenberg's point. I think, why would we pay the incremental cost to rate load it if we don't have an intention to do any, you know, industrial traffic on it? Like that's really the question we've got, is what's that price differential between keeping it as a residential light commercial and one-way traffic in an emergency versus the differential to go up to full weight loading again, and then what does it do to the lifespan of it?
Okay, thank you. And that's exactly where I was heading. But I just wanted clarity on whether there's been anything defined from the ministers or MODIA if you do that. And because, like you've said, you know, we've done so much work on the riverfront with the RV park coming in and everything that ties into it downtown, to turn it around now and have all the logging trucks and industrial traffic coming over that bridge through the city and up the hill is another conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, it really is that visionary piece. The other piece that I would add that some people push back on is if something happens on the highway side using the Johnston Bridge and Johnston Avenue and so on. We actually had a very specific situation where that occurred. In fact, it just occurred again recently. And that situation occurred during freshet when there wasn't the opportunity to merge that traffic into Highway 97 without coming across the rail tracks, coming to an intersection, etc. MODI made the decision they did not want to route traffic over the Johnston Bridge, even if they could, because they just created another nightmare for themselves at the intersection by the RCMP station, right? So it's not a gimme that it's a route around. The ultimate solution to the problem we have with the Quesnel River Bridge and the railway bridge is the interconnector for the province. It's not fixing Johnston Bridge. And I think we need to be clear about that in our heads, that fixing Johnston Bridge does not solve the issue of Highway 97 traffic problems.
If I could comment?
Yeah,
Mr.
go ahead, City Manager, then I've got Councillor Runge again.
Thank you. So the question about why bring it up, the limit back up to 63.5, in some ways it's a bit of a red herring. That bridge was built with that weight in mind. That's how it was constructed, is to bring it to that load limit of 63.5. So by fixing the deterioration, by where there's rust holes in there, by fixing those, by replacing the parts that are too corroded, by getting the bearings all working again functionally, that's good management of that infrastructure. But by doing all those things of good management, it also brings that limit back up to 63.5. I don't think you could say to a bridge engineer, well, we want to maintain it, but we just want to kind of maintain it so we only get 10,000 load limit out of it and maintain that 10,000. I think he would always suggest, well, at least bring it up to fix the problems, fix the deterioration, stop it from further deterioration. The net result of that will be a 63.5 bridge, or sorry, maybe it's 65.3, I don't.
63.5.
Or 63.5 bridge, but it's not because we're doing it to bring it up to that, it's because we're doing it to fix the bridge to a professional level of repair.
Okay, I've got Councillor Runge, and I want to jump in. I see Councillor Vic. Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is, because I actually don't know if we've had enough discussion with major industry, and I know we want to keep the precinct and the tourism precinct and all those intentions, but isn't there a way right now also to build noise restricting barriers at this time? And because the trains are going to be going through anyway, so to say, oh, it's the noise and the big equipment, there's still going to be the banging of trains and that type of stuff there. So I just think we might. I like the idea of having the load limit. The idea of seasonally adjusted might be an answer with regards to trucks going through. I don't want to lose major industry if something were to happen on Maple Drive, and we've decided as a council absolutely none of that traffic, because they are still a large taxpayer for our city. So I don't know where that fits into the discussion. While
again, I'm going to caution you to be careful, Councillor Runge. You're using alarmist language that's not necessary. Nobody's talking about losing industry. We are in constant dialogue with industry. We're in constant dialogue with industry through our forestry innovation, through our landscape plan. Council it has its own sort of way of talking with industry, but so does staff. And we're not getting this alarmist rhetoric from industry. So I would really caution council from feeding that alarmist rhetoric into the public. What we've got is an infrastructure problem, and we're trying to understand what our options are. And I think our main focus should be what's the best thing for ratepayers, given the balance of all of the investments that we're making in the community, and on balance with our transition strategy, our waterfront strategy. We've got to build a fire hall. We've got the Moffat Bridge on book that if we ever had to replace is huge. That's where we should be. We shouldn't be in this, oh my God, if we don't weight load it, we might lose industry, because we're not getting that from industry.
So let me clarify, because it was really just should the other route not work?
But again, as I cautioned Councillor Paul, yes, there's an issue on that, but that's a provincial road. So the answer to that is the province needs to make sure that industrial commercial road is maintained as an industrial commercial road. We shouldn't be picking up the slack. If we are going to pick up the slack, then they pay for the Johnston Bridge. Right? So that's where we have to use our political leverage, and we have to be wise about how we approach the thing. But what we've got in front of us is an infrastructure investment question, not a, oh my God, we may lose industry if we don't make the right decision. So let's just be careful about
Yeah,
that.
but the question is, do we want the infrastructure changed? I say, we say yes. That other discussion actually comes years from now when we could have a totally different landscape, right? By the time the bridge is repaired.
Well, again, we're making an investment that we've all agreed to, that we've agreed to expedite to build an RV park in there this summer. We've all agreed to, putting in an application to get the LHTAKO Cultural Center built. That announcement, hopefully, if we're successful in that, would be this summer as well. So, the idea that we're going to park all of that in order to address the Johnston Bridge, well, that should have been thought about before we expedited our decisions on those investments. So let's stick to the question we've got in front of us is, what's the nature of the investment we want to make in a bridge that we've got? And let's make sure that that's the conversation we're having. So Councillor Vic, I've got my notes here, if you're okay, then in the speaking order, and then I'll come to you. I think the real question in front of us, and the city manager sort of, picked apart a piece of it, is that the full repairs to this bridge put it back to the full weight load. So it is a bit of a red herring that, if you're going to fully repair the bridge, it goes, because of its engineering design, back to the weight loading that it was built for. And then the question becomes of council, a traffic flow question and a traffic, load restriction question on that bridge connected to everything else that we're doing. That's a fair comment. I think the struggle I have, and no disrespect to Chris and the city manager, is I think the numbers here are just wrong. This isn't a 2.5 million thing. This is well north of 2.5 million. When you look at the moving, the infrastructure isn't costed, the engineering design isn't costed, the length of it. And that's not on Chris or the city manager. That's just trying to work from the data set that we've got. So I think one of the things in front of council, as I said at the very beginning, is if we're leaning towards let's do a full repair, then the first thing we need from staff is to go do the work to say, what does a full repair actually look like, and what is it actually going to cost us, and what would the timeline be? Start to dig in to say, this is how that project is going to look, and this is really firmer numbers and what it's going to cost us. That's why I struggle with the recommendation saying 500 from gas tax and 2 million from capital, because those aren't the numbers. So I don't think we should, we should engage in the recommendation until we get harder numbers, because we may want to actually go out to an alternate approval process to borrow the money to do this, rather than screwing up our capital plan in order to accommodate it. So the financing question and how we finance it is separate from what is it we want to do with the bridge. Part of the information I would like to see gets to Councillor Elliott's point, which is that the extent of the life of this bridge, 15 to 20 years in the engineering world, is if its carrying capacity is at its weight restriction, an engineered weight load. So if we actually repair it to its weight capacity, but don't allow the kind of traffic on it that's destroying it, what does that do to the extent of the life of that bridge? Is it a 30-year bridge now, or is it a 40-year bridge? We need to have that information available to us. We know it's predominantly the logging trucks hitting the ends of the bridge, the debris and the salt and stuff coming off of them that's causing the major deterioration. So if that's not in the mix and it's repaired, what's the actual potential life of that if it stays at 10K? That's information we need as a council to justify making that kind of investment, but keeping the weight load lower, except in exigent circumstances. The other piece I think we need to understand with this is the actual time frame as indicated. What is the time duration for this, and how would we accommodate such a project logistically? Because Councillor Runge is correct. There's got to have to be some kind of marshalling area. You know, what does the project actually look like? And we need to understand that, because again, I think there's costs and logistics involved with that, and taking that bridge out of the mix. If we are moving the interconnector forward, and you've got the ministry working on those bridges and we're working on our bridge, there's some coordination that we have to be willing to do. And this bridge isn't going to fail in the next couple of years. It will still keep holding, you know, the loading with the cleanup and stuff, so we can time our project in accordance with intelligence we get from the ministry. And if we can time our project, it also means that we may want to do some advanced work on the financing of that project. So for me, I'd like to see the more detailed, thorough plan of what is currently option A. But I would also like to see option B further explored as well, that not taking it to weight loading. I would like to see the details on the lifespan of both those options, not at that weight loading, not having that truck traffic on there. What does it do to lifespan? And then I'd like to get an idea of a replacement cost. Some kind of sense that if this lifespan, if we say we're not really going to do anything on the bridge for 10 or 15 years, and then we're going to replace it, that actually may be the most fiscally prudent thing to do, is to let it, you know, have 10 years while we do what we need to do to prepare to replace the bridge. Because at 15 years for 2.5 million, you know, maybe the best thing to do is to let the bridge age out in place while we plan to replace it. So I'd like to know more about what the replacement scenario is as well. And then from that information, council comes back and sort of makes a decision on what path forward, and then we can have the financing and how we finance it discussion as a separate discussion from the route that we're going to take with the bridge. Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for those comments. This is a tough one for sure. I guess the first question I have as a result of listening to your comments, Mr. Mayor, is, and maybe this is to Director Coben, the 2.5 million, is that based from the original work done in 2018, or is that more a recent number from 2020?
Yes, if you look at the McCall Engineering revised report on the final page, the numbers all in blue are the revisions to the options. So the numbers McCall has come up with is in the $1.7 million range. However, I recognize that, you know, with actual construction contingencies, projects in the past due to inflation, I bumped that number up to 2.5. So until we go out for pricing, we never will know the actual costs. The bids will tell, but this is the best estimate that they've come up with.
But history has certainly shown that it's been higher. So,
But Councillor Vic, for clarity, Chris, that cost does not include what?
Well, there's things that are limited. So I think there's some things missing, such as potential traffic control. No social implications have been taken into account. Not that there would necessarily be lots of cost to that, but the biggest unknown, as I've outlined in my report, is the temporary utility relocations. We know there's hydro, natural gas, we have a water main, and essentially if you're lifting up the bridge, until we do more detailed engineering and planning around these utility locates, that's the number where I'm not convinced that that's a heavy enough, solid enough number. So that number is light on the McCall report.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Vic.
So understanding that, and I agree with the mayor's comments that we need sort of a real number here that takes into account things that you've just discussed. Having said that, I still feel that, you know, we have a bridge that has some major issues, which is identified in, there's 30 photographs there. There's lots of issues with that bridge. And I think it's incumbent upon us to have a piece of infrastructure that frankly is maintained properly. Now, the 2.5 million may not be the right number, but hopefully it's in that ballpark. And I think for that price tag to do that work, including the bearings, the coating, all of that, and understanding that if we don't load the bridge to 63.5, we could get far greater than 20 years. I think that's fair value for taxpayers. And more importantly, it gives us a solid piece of infrastructure, no matter what the future looks like with how trucks get up to the mill or industrial traffic using the interconnector. I still think it provides the community with a piece of infrastructure that's maintained properly that could be used for various purposes. So I still feel option A is the right one. Understanding we need a real number if there's holes in this number that we've got in front of us. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, other questions or comments from council? Councilor Rudenberg,
Thank you.
Councilor Goulet next.
I was just going back into the report, and I guess it's on page 29 of 62, and I'm not sure if it was from it looks like it was from the 2018 report that we initially got, and it talked about present value and benefit versus cost ratio. Did they do that for the second time around? Or does that benefit cost ratio remain the same?
There may be slight adjustments just due to the fact that only the three options plus the do nothing option was considered for the 2020 report. And that's due to the fact that the high cost of just getting the engineers to revisit all these numbers and work out the different scenarios. So it would be slightly changed, but not lots. And with the phasing, yes, that it wasn't considered for, remobilization and the effects of closing the bridge, another engineering phased approach that wasn't considered.
Okay, so these really aren't of any benefit to us then to take that into consideration, that particular graph? Or
Well, they're definitely a guideline there, which they are useful because it does present. But the numbers of on the last page of the comprehensive options, those are the most recent revisions to the original 2018 report.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, Councilor Goulet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm looking at and read the reports and looking at, option A seems and would be the most, to me, logical. And I'm hearing the debate if we can, I think the load limit and the rating becomes a separate discussion. It's how do we get this project moving forward at some point, right? And to the mayor's comment, I wrote down in my notes here, I was looking at the 2.5 but it's been answered as to whether or not that's the actual cost to make this happen. Like option A, and if you look at option B, they both sort of fit in together as one, right? Combining them together. So is there a way to, and I guess what the staff and what's happening is they're asking that we look at a way to move this forward, to get the repairs done. As Councillor Vic said, it is a vital piece of infrastructure at points, right? It does have traffic in it, and it becomes vital. Just how do we get there to make this happen? And there's going to be a lot of unknowns, I think, and that's part of this report too, as to how we move this forward. This is a tough decision, but I think we need to move forward on this. We've been waiting. This report's 2018, 2020. We've been waiting, and I think we need to figure out how we just progress with this. I think there's a piece for me that we need to that information needs to come back to us on the full actual costing, like give some direction on whether we want to look at option A with I guess an amendment or however we want to word that to say, let's get some real figures here on what this thing is actually going to cost us, and then have a separate discussion, I think, on the load limit after we figure out how we do it. I think for me, like I said, it was two pieces, right? There was just two pieces in there that were unknown.
Okay, so if I could, because I'm hearing a kind of a general consensus. So is council comfortable? The recommendation embeds it as we land on option A and this is how we're going to finance it. Is council comfortable, as the city manager and I indicated, given direction to staff to go and do some further refinements and then come back and then we deal with the how do we finance this separately? Because we have other options than just tapping into reserves. And we do have other projects that are of a kind on this. So I'm seeing nodding that, you know, if we advance that, the next stage really is to come back with a kind of a project proposal. And I would suggest that the project proposal be around the option A. So a full meal deal repairs, that we get better refinement on the all-in costs. So that, as Director Coben indicated, you know, trying to get a better sense of what would the all-in cost be. What are some of the, you know, thinking that we can do on project logistics and timing, you know, vis-a-vis our dialogue with the province around the interconnector. So what would that actually look like? So where would things be marshaled? Some of the things that, you know, have been bandied about here, if that's possible. The implications, I think, needs to come back to us on the lifespan if we do the full repairs, but don't go back to the full weight loading. Council needs to kind of understand what does that do to the lifespan of the bridge? Because if the investment's around 3 million, but the lifespan goes to 30 years, if you don't weight load it, that will help council make the next decision in terms of weight restrictions, which would then be just within the purview of council. So that then would come back to us as a more refined, focused document with some of the questions that we've got answered in it. Then we would deal with the financing and the timing issue for it once we've got those more information. So I want to check, I see Councillor Elliott's hand up. I want to check with the city manager and Director Coben. Would that make sense to you guys? It gives you the kind of direction you're looking for at this stage?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that's really good direction, that a selection of option A. We look at the detailed engineering, the all-in cost, the timing, the logistics, just figure out what that game plan is to make that happen. I do have to, of course, let council know that we can't do this ourselves. This is all will be professional engineering. So there will be a fairly substantial price tag to this. Having said that, that price tag will exist whenever we do this project. We need to figure this stuff out. So I can't even hazard a guess what that price tag is. Staff were sitting around today and we were thinking somewhere maybe between a couple $100,000 versus $500,000 if you go right to full detailed engineering. So I don't know what that is. We'll figure that out and report back to you guys and get some, I guess, a bit of further direction on that price tag for that work. But I think it's clearly the right direction to go.
Okay. And Director Coben, you want to add anything there?
Yes, I think if we have the direction to go ahead with the detailed design and spend that money up front to get a good handle on the time frame, what it would take to get this bridge done, which will take some extensive legwork. Like the report mentioned, it would be a 2-year process. So essentially we may have, 6 to 8 months here of engineering to come back with more in-depth costs on what this would cost.
Okay. Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have any issue with that to begin with. But what we're saying is that we want it to come back. We want cost estimates, everything figured out for getting it to the 63.5. But I'd like to see, so if we do that, we still have the option of reducing the industrial traffic.
Yes.
So why can't we have another estimate of just having the bridge rated for non-industrial traffic, what the lifespan of that bridge is going to be, and then, as you mentioned before, what the cost of a brand new bridge at the end of that would be. Instead of going right to the 63.5, if we're going to knock it right down to no industrial anyway, that option, I think we should be looking at a minimalistic option as well, to see what that cost is, because we're talking about the ratepayers. So what can the ratepayers afford here? As mentioned before, industry isn't stepping up and saying, you know, we'll put some skin in the game. This is something that we want. The people that are talking in the CRD that aren't in the city, you know, they want everything to the nth degree. I get that, but it really comes down to our ratepayers. So I would like to see a minimalistic approach, but also the 63.5, as you've mentioned, and then we can decide on that. I think for me, that would be logical, so long as the cost incurred in that minimal report isn't, you know, exuberant. But I think it would be pretty straightforward.
So you're talking about advancing option B along with option A, so that the work is done on the not coming back to weight loading, but doing the improvements that are necessary for it to take that lower weight capacity.
I think that our ratepayers deserve to see that number.
Okay.
And then it's on council. You want hard decisions, then it's on council to decide if they want to put it up to 63.5 for the possibility of industry, or if it comes down to a lower level because it's the ratepayers that are going to be paying for it. That's my comment.
Yeah, and I think Councillor Rudenberg, that was a question you were asking, you know, in terms of why would we pay the full meal deal and then not go to the weight loading. My only suggestion on that is that's why I was asking for the lifespan differential, because that investment may get you a 40-year bridge as opposed to, you know, a 1.5 million investment gets you a 10-year bridge, that kind of thing. But again, I looked at Director Coben and City Manager, the running parallel, the two options. What does that, how does that sit with you guys, and what would it look like logistically?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I think that is somewhat more challenging. Just what we've laid out in this 2020 McCall revision. If you look at the first option, which is option A, on the last page, it talks about replacing light bracing. It also talks about a girder coating, whereas, and that's a 15 to 20 year service life at full weight rating. The minimal repairs, it doesn't take into account light bracing replacement, and it doesn't take into account the girder coating, which essentially will you know, lengthen the lifespan of that bridge regardless what traffic flows on, but it does keep that at a 10-ton limit. So the girder coating, that would definitely be an advantage. What the cost differences are, that remains to be seen, but I guess if staff does have direction to proceed with one option, it does make the engineering way simpler and more straightforward.
But I think the trade-off, Councillor Elliott, you know, in my mind, and what we're trying to find out, you know, what's the position for us is that lifespan piece, right? So if it is fully repaired and you're not allowing that industrial traffic on it, if we're going to get an extended lifespan out of it, then your investments over that period of time, and you're delaying to the out years any potential replacement. So that's kind of where my head is going with it, but I'm with you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could talk on that. I do agree with what Director Coben is saying around the importance of the girder coating, the importance of the replacement of some of the parts and pieces in there. The problem with just the very fix it up for a lightweight scenario, I believe, is that the bridge will continue to deteriorate. It will get worse and worse, and finally the choice will be out of your hands of what you do with it, because it'll be deteriorated so badly. Your options will be to replace it or not replace it. So I think if you're gonna fix it, you need to fix it to at least to the point where the deterioration stops and it's a sustainable asset for the long run. So I think if I heard properly, perhaps we do the detailed work then around option A, we spend the money on the engineering, but at the same time we say to them, okay, what about option B, and just get some thoughts around option B so you have at least something to judge that with. But at the end of the day, our mission here, why we're bringing this forward is hopefully to try to cut the working options down to a minimum, right? Because it's expensive to investigate too many options and it just adds work.
So I've got Councillor Runge.
So my question is to City Manager Johnston, I guess Director Coben. With the engineering report, would that engineering report already bring us close enough? So if we decided on this option, we would already, we'd have things to, put out for bid so that or would that require another 500,000 after that? It's like for me, I think this has to be done. I think we should be looking at a report that gets us as close to saying, hey, let's put this into the bid state and get going. And with the things that Councillor Elliott has said, because you could just parse out a couple things in that report. I absolutely agree. If we have to look at lower weight and that increases that life to 40 years or plus or whatever, that's a real, because that changes options all around for everybody. And then my second question, and I'm not sure it's, well, we'll maybe stay with that first with
City Manager, Director Coben.
Why don't you take that?
Yeah, the report, like the up to 500,000, we don't know the exact extent or the exact cost of what it will take to, evaluate specifically the utility moves, etc. This is somewhat new to the city. We've never undertaken anything to the extent where we've essentially had to lift the bridge up. The previous Johnston Bridge repair, the major work that was done on that involved, reinstalling the surface decking. So I don't have the number of what it will cost now. We would get our pricing, work towards the detailed design, cost estimates for repair, and of course, any funds remaining that would just stay within that project to work towards.
I think the question Councillor Runge is asking though, Chris, is the expenditure gets us to the point where if council likes what it sees on lifespan, etc., that we're moving into the project, we can move into the project phase because that engineering work then becomes, the project or the RFP or whatever.
Okay,
like that, gotcha. Is that where this work is going to get us to is the question?
I think we can make sure that it does.
Yes.
I think that will be the parameter that we lay out in front of the bridge engineer. We say, we need the detailed engineering. We need all these questions answered. And at the end of the day, we want to be able to have a document that becomes our bid document or the real meat behind the bid document, right?
Yeah. And if I could add to that, what I'm hearing from the bridge engineers is that due to the two season project design, tendering, preparation in the first season, and then the actual construction in the second season, the big delay while that design and tendering work is going on is the actual building of the bearings. Like, these aren't something that's just on a shelf somewhere in stock. That's where these design, and that's where the coordination of the design tendering process into the bid comes into place. So what I'm saying is essentially there possibly could be a short delay, but if we get on this now, we can work towards that repair and having that work all done.
Yeah, and I think council needs to keep in mind, notwithstanding, we're going to potentially have to time this project if we're successful in pushing the interconnector, and we've got that project going on too. So we're going to have to kind of roll with this a little bit, but I think the question's answered, Councillor Runge, of, yes, the intention is this is moving us, the investment is moving us to make it a project and be able to get it out for bid. You had another comment or question?
Yeah. My second question is, should we decide on alternate financing options? Do we have to also, or is it beneficial to us to throw in some of those other options so that we go to the citizens with a combined option possibly? Because there are two things, I see fire hall and these kind of, they're both big, big projects.
Yeah, and I think that's the conversation we need to have. That's why I want to park it, because by then, we'll know whether we're successful on the, the fire hall grant submission we've got in. We'll know where we're at on other capital issues. So yeah, we need to have that finance. How do we finance this relative to our other financial issues at that time? Okay,
Thank you.
okay. Now, Councillor Vic, did I see you waving your hand? Because I have Councillor Paul and Councillor Rudenberg, but I wasn't sure if you were just waving your pen for fun or at me. You're good? Okay. Councillor Paul, then Councillor Rudenberg.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Elliott's comment about looking after the ratepayer sort of reminded me that these three bridges, we have Baker, Moffat, and Johnston. Those bridges should never have been downloaded by the provincial government, and the proof is in the pudding. I walk the dog every day, and I walk down Moffat and back on Johnston. And the traffic on Johnston right now, I'm looking out the window, and it's basically steady. And most of it is pretty well northbound, and it's coming in from out of town. And so really, I mean, we're not going to change anything, but it would be great if the provincial government would realize that they should be responsible for the repair and maintenance of a lot of these bridges that really are part of the regional highway or arterial highway network, and it shouldn't just fall on the shoulders of the city taxpayer alone.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Paul. And we are working on that, and part of the timing around this is I think there's going to be another Canada infrastructure opening as well, and so I think that's something that council definitely needs to bear in mind. Councillor Rudenberg.
So after listening to all the discussion here, for me, what it comes down to is looking at option A, so that we give staff that opportunity to move forward, understanding that there's, you know, the extension of the life versus the cost depends on what the final decision that I think that we have to make is whether it comes down to full load bearing or not. So if we can make a decision, it's that second part, full load bearing or not, I think that drives the rest of the decision. Because I think staff is right. They need to have that opportunity to kind of sort of get down to the nitty gritty of one kind of option so that they can make it move forward. You're right. It's not a 6-month project. You know, when I heard 2 years before it possibly would even get started. So I think we need not to start muddying the waters too much by having more than one, you know, one option with a B, C, D added onto it. I think that if we look at an option for me, and then the decision later comes down to whether we make it full weight bearing or not. And that will allow us to move forward with knowing that the cost, you know, if it's a 15, 20 or 30-year bridge now. Thanks.
For clarity, because we've had the conversation and I've thrown it out there a couple of times, Chris, just for clarity, in terms of lifespan numbers that we've got in front of us, so that 15 to 20 year remaining service life at the load rating, that's assuming that the bridge is operating at load rating, correct?
That's correct.
So are we correct in saying that if we choose to make that kind of level of investment, but we also choose to keep it at the 10K load rating, we can expect the engineers to come back and say your service life should be expanded as well?
Yes, that's correct, Mayor.
Yeah, because then that's where we do the math for the ratepayers, Councillor Elliott, of, yeah, we've done the full repairs, but that is amortized over now a longer service life for that bridge and avoiding that replacement cost in the near term by going to weight loading. That makes it a lot easier for us to have that conversation with industry and with the truckers and so on, because if they want to pay the differential in some kind of toll for the shortening of the lifespan, we've got the documentation to show what that shortening would look like and what the cost is to our ratepayers for it. So, Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't disagree with that at all. And I think that's exactly what I was getting to. The other thing is, I mean, yeah, we should make this easier on staff and everybody that's doing it. Okay, we're looking at 14 different options. Now we're narrowing it down to 1 or 2, right? To me, we've been doing a lot of good work. So I'm not a bridge designer, but all I'm saying is that, yeah, I get it. If we want to bring it up to the 63.5 and then decide if it's going to be 10 or not, that's one discussion. But I would just like to mention it to the engineers that, look, if there's something that's more minimalistic that will get us through and keep us at the 10K for that extended amount of time or something close, then I think we're remiss to not even have that conversation.
And I think that as the city manager indicated and Director Coben is, the lead for the project, if that's in the back of your mind the whole time when you're working with these guys of, is there an alternate option that is less pricey, et cetera, but the main work you're doing is on that option A, you'll be able to gather that intelligence and be able to answer those questions when it comes back to council. Is that fair comment?
Yes, it is, Mr. Mayor, and in fact, that is part of where this revision to this report came from, is to consider all options, including a 10-ton bridge option repair. So yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Thanks for the clarity. That's perfect.
Okay. With that in mind, then I would suggest that a motion to the effect that council would like staff to continue to explore and refine option A with a view to coming back to council with the costs associated with getting option A developed, the actual costs associated with that option, the potential project timelines and logistics, and then any potential implications on lifespan. So the next step would be, with this motion, to have staff pursue this option, would be to come back to us with a project description and a price and where that money is going to come from, right? Or do we even need, city manager, I mean, this was a kind of a more directions meeting. Do we need a formal resolution, or can you take it that, your next piece is to come back with a report that seeks the funding to do what council is directing you to do?
Yeah, and that would be fine, Mr. Mayor. And I think what we won't have, even when we come back next time, is the project cost. We will have the cost of doing this next piece of work, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that final project cost won't be known until the engineering is known. But I think we will look at, basically, it's putting a business plan together for this, the development of what we're going to do, and then bring that to council for funding. Yeah,
Okay.
and that should be fairly short order, bringing that back to council.
So is council comfortable with that? This is just, we've had the conversation, we've landed, staff is now going to bring back something more formal. Okay. With that in mind, then, if we're comfortable moving on, anything else from city manager or Director Coben? No, you guys are good. Okay, then in the bylaws, then, sorry, I'm just scrolling to get the right number this time for the bylaw. Where are we at here? Okay, Johnston Bridge. Okay, so the bylaw is 1906, final reading of our tax, our City of Quesnel 5-year financial plan bylaw. Councillor Elliott, so moved. Councillor Goulet, second. Any further questions or comments? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion has carried unanimously. And are there any announcements, future events?
Sorry, Mayor, we have to do bylaw 1907, the tax rates.
Oh,
bylaw.
sorry, there's two. I had to switch
So moved.
pages here. Bylaw 1907, City of Quesnel tax rates. Councillor Elliott moved, Councillor Paul second. Any further questions or comments on that one? Okay, anyone opposed? So that's carried unanimously. Thank you for that catch. Announcements, future events. Seeing none. Any gallery questions? We do have some press on.
Yeah, this might be a really silly question, but I guess what would it cost to just build a new bridge?
12 to 13 million cost estimate. From when was that, Chris?
2018.
2018. So yeah, you'd probably be closer to 15, 18 million if we're lucky. And then depending on the time delay of getting to it, 20 million.
Thank you, much appreciated.
Okay, anything else? Okay, motion to adjourn. Councillor Paul, Councillor Rudenberg, anyone opposed to that one? Okay. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy your evening. Thanks for the work and thanks for the conversation.